Thank you very much. So when we think of the state of the environment, I think we naturally think about things like clean air, clean water, wetlands protection, now carbon emissions, climate change. Indeed, all of these are going to be the focus of different panels throughout the day. But we also have to think about zoning, land use controls, and land conservation. Because how and where we decide to develop land is going to have an enormous impact on all of our other environmental concerns. So take climate change, for example. Buildings produce almost 40% of the nation's CO2 emissions. Transportation amounts to an additional 1/6. So together, over 50% of carbon emissions in the United States is a direct product of where and how we choose to build. Compact urban form, density, is really the key to reducing emissions from both sources. But, no surprise to anyone here, we continue to see sprawling development throughout the country, and especially in the Southeast, consuming land, increasing commute times, and often increasing housing sizes. So across all dimensions that we care about in the environment, zoning, land use regulations, and land conservation are really central to how we should think about and respond to the issues that we all care about. And this panel is going to look at these issues in particular. And it is a terrific panel. One of the things that we have been asked to do is a break from norms in giving long introductions of each of our panelists. Trust me, they are all distinguished. We have bios around, but we are going to be presenting, hearing from them in the following order. First, we're going to hear from Lucy Kempf, who's the Executive Director, Metro Nashville Planning Department. She's going to be talking about zoning in Nashville. We're then going to be hearing from Kendra Abkowitz, who's the Sustainability Chief in Mayor O'Connell's office, talking about the city's efforts at climate adaptation and how that interacts with land use. Mark Deutschmann is the founder of Village Realty and the City Living Group. He's also on the Greenways Commission and has been very involved in the Greenway Plan to connect the city and is going to be talking about those efforts. Greer Tidwell is the Deputy Commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation and is going to be speaking on the governor's land conservation strategy. And Liz McLaurin is the President and CEO of the Land Trust for Tennessee, and she'll be talking about her organization's statewide conservation goals. Also, perhaps breaking with norms from other conferences, we've asked them each to speak very briefly, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, to, I hope, leave plenty of time for conversation among panelists and to respond to questions from the audience. So please, take it away, Lucy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you to Vanderbilt for bringing forward this really critical topic and integration of professions needed to address it. So let's, do I get to lead? Oh, perfect. Okay. So hopefully some of you in this room might be familiar with the growth and preservation map of Nashville Next. So that's the general plan of the city. And basically it's meant to provide a really strategic guide about where we want to grow and where we want to protect land and why. It's obviously not this clean in terms of implementation, right? But this is meant to be the governing plan that says generally when you see the blue streets, we want to integrate more dense land uses and transportation infrastructure. And where you see the green areas, generally we want to preserve those areas. And often that has quite a bit to do with natural resources. It can also have to do with the land forms as well as the, the patterns of development and how the city has grown. While we very much would like to continue to protect the areas in green and really focus development on the areas in orange and navy, I think what you see is in Nashville, because we do have a zoning code that hasn't been updated in some 20 years or so, we still have a lot of sprawling development. And so there are challenges that we have on the table that we do need to address. I'd say the other core challenge is we very much tie infrastructure delivery to the private sector. We have I would call it an unhealthy dependency on the private sector to deliver certain infrastructure. And it's important for us as a city to rebalance that. So the planning department has been evolving from strictly a regulatory department to one that has a robust long-range planning section, and also a section that thinks more about not just the built environment, but our ecological environment as well. And so the design studio under Joni Williams, who's here, give everybody a raise, came up as a section that really focused on downtown buildings and what made really great buildings. But now they're thinking more about what it means to actually have a landscape solution to our development, what that looks like in our ecological design. And when they came together, I asked them a question. If you look at Nashville Next, it assumes that growth should be oriented a certain way. If you looked at our natural features, our DNA, the way the city was or the land was 500 years ago, would we want to be growing the way that we have, what is Nashville Next match that? And so they've been focused on this exploration of the identity of our city from a natural resource perspective. And it is really interesting because I think, when I sit at planning commission meetings, I hear a lot of residents say, we feel like we're losing a sense of ourselves. And we focus a lot about the loss of restaurants, the loss of meaningful cultural assets, but what about the loss of the hillsides, for example? Things that you see and you appreciate, but maybe don't realize how important they were until they're gone. And so part of it is, how do you start to name the features that make us what we are? And I'm happy to say that I do think we are growing in the right places, but I do think that there are characteristics that make Southeast Davidson County really different from Northwest, even though they may have very similar characteristics, if you will. And so they're starting to look very much at the patterns of our growth and development and the inherent resources that we have as a city. And then the real trick is, when we're reviewing projects, how do we protect and enhance these assets? Learning to do a systems approach to our work and development as a city is going to be a huge growth step for us, but a really critical one if we care about sort of the environment here and how to grow in a more thoughtful way. Here are just some examples of the kinds of questions that they ask. Again, this isn't a project by project, site review by site review where the department may have been about 10 years ago. Hopefully these are getting us to systems questions in a way that can bring the city along, thinking more 20, 50 years down the road what we want to be, as opposed to looking at projects by projects and what that looks like. I just want to mention two things really quickly. We've changed, this is not very sexy. Subdivision regulations are not very exciting.
Oh, yes, they are.
Okay, what I will say is we've taken real strides this year to encourage smaller homes and different kinds of footprints near corridors, and to really limit housing development where there are a concentration of natural resources. And so I'm not going to tell you how. It's here. I can give you information if you have questions about it, but those are things that we're really focused on. Tennessee is, someone mentioned, a southern state with really strong protections for property rights. And so whatever it is that we do, we are in the protect the private property right regime, but also try to do the right thing, which makes it a really challenging conundrum. Sometimes we think we accomplish that here. I will mention there's some specific areas on our riverfront, including on the East Bank, where we've really tried to look at the development of open space and integrated stormwater solutions and our river in a more thoughtful way. And I can talk more about that if you have questions. But generally speaking, I think we've got some big challenges, but overall, I'm optimistic about the direction that we're going in as a city. And these fine people here are going to tell you all about, you're going next, okay. Thank you, yes.
Thank you very much. So I think we will go straight through with each of the presentations and then have conversation at the end. So Kendra.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kendra Abkowitz, and I work in Mayor O'Connell's office on climate sustainability and resilience issues. It's great to see so many familiar faces and just a really incredible turnout. So kudos to the law school for putting this together. Really, really great event. So in my role, I get the privilege of working across many different metro departments that touch, again, climate, sustainability, resilience. And so that includes folks like Lucy and her team in planning, also our Parks and Recreation Department, Water Services, Waste Services, General Services, NDOT, WEGO, Office of Emergency Management, and the list goes on. If there's one thing I want to share with you today, it's that there's a lot of really, really great work happening in the conservation and climate adaptation space, also in the greenhouse gas mitigation space as well, but that's not as much the focus of our panel today. So really incredible work that those departments are doing. I wanted to highlight a couple of near-term projects and things that we'll be working on across departments over the coming months that I'm really excited about and I think are going to do great things for our city. The first is our Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan. And this is an effort that's about 18 months in the making at this point. It's a really great companion document to our Climate Action Plan that was created by committee in 2021. And so this is one of our city's first more recent efforts to, again, look at how we're adapting to climate change and the impacts that we'll feel. So it goes through hazard and vulnerability assessment and then puts forth numerous strategies that we can take across our metro departments to try to protect our assets, both physical built infrastructure as well as natural resources, and most importantly, our people from the effects of a changing climate. So unsurprisingly, heat and flooding, both riverine and pluvial, are real significant concerns for our city. And something we're trying to understand a little bit better is going beyond that census tract level to more of the census block level, and then also trying to layer in demographics and other characteristics of our population so that we can understand sort of who is at most risk of bearing those burdens, and in many cases disproportionately. So that plan was released in draft form last fall, and we're currently in the process of working to finalize it. I say finalize, but recognize that as with many good plans, it will regularly be revisited and updated. Our target is on an annual basis. And so again, I think the really important pieces of that is that it does set forth numerous strategies, close to 60 strategies, mitigation strategies that we'll be actively working towards over the near, midterm, and long term. As a companion resource to that, we convened 13 different metro departments over the course of the summer in partnership with the Wondery. So I saw Jacqueline earlier. Thank you to Jacqueline for making that possible. What we developed in partnership with those departments was a toolkit. This one actually focused on both sustainability and resilience. And so we're in the process of also working to refine that. And those are resources that each of our departments will be able to use to look at vulnerability assessments on the asset level and on a systems basis. Also opportunities for identifying metrics and measuring progress as it relates to sustainability and resilience at the departmental level. And so what it starts to look like is, instead of sort of having a top-down approach to sustainability and resilience, we're equipping our departments with tools and the ability to embed those things within their operations, which I think is really important if we're actually going to see a change in how we're managing climate issues. And so I'm very excited, again, to get that out and into the wild and to be used by our departments. Many of you may have been aware that we first started tackling urban heat work in a more focused sense in summer of 2022 when we partnered with NOAA and Kappa Strategies to do an urban heat mapping campaign. And so we had hundreds of volunteers go out across Nashville and map 10 different routes across the city. And that provided for us a really, really great temperature and humidity data set that allows us to understand where some of the hottest areas of the city are from a temperature and humidity perspective, and then those that are comparatively cooler. I will be the first to say that we didn't necessarily learn anything new from that, but it did confirm what we thought to be true in terms of some of the tensions and sort of the need to balance what dense development looks like and then what that does from from an extreme heat perspective. So our next step over this past spring was to develop a heat vulnerability map and index that, again, looked at those different demographic data sets, public health data sets, and understand not only just where are we seeing the hotter areas of our city, but where are populations actually feeling that and experiencing that heat in a most vulnerable way. That was a great effort, again, multi-departmental in nature, and we now have a great snapshot, again, of being able to understand where our most heat vulnerable populations are. Something that we are hoping to get off the ground and running over the next year is a more focused heat mitigation strategy for our city. Again, I think we're quickly realizing that this is a topic that deserves resources on its own. And we're hopeful that an EPA community change grant that we'll be applying for in North Nashville will really allow us to laser focus on how we might do that in a specific neighborhood. That grant is also highly likely to look at air pollution and how, again, different populations feel air pollution, as well as energy burden, and also, creation of wealth within those populations. And so how can you thread all of those different issues together and enable a community to really thrive, again, from a business ownership, workforce participation perspective. And then finally, I wanted to speak a little bit to some efforts that will really nicely complement what Lucy noted with the Ecological Design Studio. Our Parks Department will also be taking a closer look at their acquisition strategy to try to help prioritize, again, where it might make sense for Metro to be a landowner and a steward of those resources versus where it might be best suited to use different tools to conserve and protect those properties. And so happy to go into more details to the extent that we know them if there's interest later.
We're next going to hear from Mark Deutschmann, talking about greenways and provide the perspective of the developer sector as well. Yeah.
So my name is Mark Deutschmann, and beyond my real estate sales companies, I have a development company called Core Development, which has been around for 20-something years. And we've done a lot of walkable neighborhood work. We've done the lofts at Worthing Mills. We've done projects downtown when the downtown didn't have any housing, 12 South, Sylvan Park, et cetera. We're currently working in the Wedgwood Houston neighborhoods, and we're doing stuff out in Inner Madison at this point with the Memorial Hospital. So we look at walkable communities, sort of that 1 mile radius strategy, which I think aligns with land conservation. But now as we, I look back and think about what we were doing in 2008, 2009 in Carl Dean's term with Ann Davis and Jeannie Nelson. They're working a program called Nashville Naturally. And at that time, we looked at the 4 quadrants of the county, and we looked at anything from Percy Warner Park to what was happening in Southeast Nashville to the Bells Bend and Beeman Parks, and came up with a plan to create 4 major park systems connected by habitat corridors on the minor rivers, and really had great success. I think during that time we were able to secure 4,500 acres of land, a lot in Southeast Nashville on Mill Creek, and we were able to build nearly 100 miles of greenways during that time to connect the corridors. And that's what was happening then, and it was hugely important work, and I'm sure it has a lot of ramifications for what we're doing now. But then now fast forward to the current, where we are now, and we really need to build out the urban greenway and complete street system. So we're thinking about what's called the City Central Greenway, which is a 32 or 35 mile loop around the city. Maybe 10 miles are completed. Some of that, there's a lot of it in the works right now. There's sections that are going to enhance land conservation and some which are really just transportation corridors. For instance, we have a section of miles at the 440 Greenway, which is really just an easement which will get people from point A to point B. There's a section, though, that would go from 440 Greenway down to Geodis on Browns Creek and eventually get you all the way down to Rolling Mill Hill. That is, it's a minor river, but it offers lots and lots of opportunities for land conservation and pocket parks. For instance, if you go across Nolensville Road and head to Murfreesboro Road, there's lots of floodplain next to Trevecca. You can imagine taking in and creating small pocket parks in neighborhoods which are underserved. Then there's other sections like our rail and trail that will go from Centennial Park down to the farmers market. It's about a 5-mile section that's in final engineering at this point, ready to go. It's an old rail and trail that has a lot of concrete, so in order for us to create some pocket parks in underserved neighborhoods, we would need to rip up some asphalt and really, we'd have to consciously create those opportunities, which really connect an underserved neighborhood that's a food desert, and also probably an area that doesn't have access to that walkability or neighborhood park that's so good for our health and wellness and mental health, as you know. So all that stuff's really wonderful. I think there's places where we have to take advantage when we can, and I know in the Great Flood you guys took advantage with the flood buyouts to create like the Browns Creek Park system, but later terms we nearly had a development in Fort Negley. So we have the Fort Negley and the old Greer Stadium, which is a lot of asphalt. That was going to become a development, but now it has decided not to be a development, and there's a master plan for that 68-acre park system, which will not only memorialize the history of the park and the neighborhoods that were there, but also create an amazing opportunity for an underserved neighborhood that probably rivals a Centennial Park or a bicentennial mall, bicentennial park system for those neighborhoods. So I'm personally sort of going at this through the Greenways. I've been part of Greenways for Nashville and part of the Greenways Commission, but I'm back on in that organization, and I've joined the Middle Tennessee Transit Alliance, and I'm also a very big part of the Urban Land Institute, which has a Building Healthy Places and an Active Mobility committee that's forming right now, because we want to take advantage of all these opportunities for land conservation and building greenways with this transit referendum that I think is going to be announced someday soon. And if it does get announced, I think that we're going to be thinking about the corridors and transit and thinking about land conservation and building density at the transit stops. But I think we'll also be thinking about how to get to those transit stops, which means we get to build greenways, which means we get to think about planning those greenways and how we add little park systems throughout, which I know it's Jeannie's pet peeve. We don't have enough pocket parks in the core. Maybe we can make it happen right now. So anyway, that's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to mention Gary Gaston. We just created a secret sidewalk connector from the Nations over to Charlotte. I think those are little secret things that you can do with greenways that create little parks and connectors.
And just so everyone knows, the students aren't walking out to protest as far as I know. We change classes on the half hour typically. So
I guess when I said the word developer, they all left.
Next, we're going to hear from Greer Tidwell, Deputy Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation.
Hey, thank you, and Mark, thank you for what you're doing in my hometown. Appreciate that. And if you've got Gary involved, watch out. It's very likely to get done. Good to see you, Gary. So we've heard a lot so far this morning about kind of what's going on in Nashville. And as I said, this is my hometown. I can tell you it's my hometown. I've got proof right here in the room. So I've got a neighbor in the room. Keith, how are you? I've got a high school classmate in the room. Martin, how are you? And in this day and age, you should always have one of your legal counsel in the room with you. Stephanie, did you see up there? So this is my hometown. Exactly. It's really good to be part of this back at my alma mater in traffic. Parking is no better than it was when I was here in law school. I was hoping we could fix some of that. So I have one introduction I want to make before sharing a little bit more about Governor Lee's conservation strategy and the land aspects of that. That is a return back to state government from the jackbooted thugs of the U.S. Corps of Engineers. Bill Avant, stand up, Bill, please. And good to see you. Really glad to have you back on team. And with him is Adam Binger, an experienced Texas landman who's up here helping us in acquisitions and property management. We're building out that team because we've been asked to do a lot in the realm of conservation lands, which is something that could not be done without the momentum built by people like Liz, Jeannie, Dory. I'm looking around, I'm missing faces, but the land trust not-for-profit organizations in Tennessee have become so mature. Laurel, I see you hiding behind your phone up there taking a picture. The land trust organizations of Tennessee have become so mature and so capable of working with each other, with the various governmental organizations, and leveraging the dollars from the private sector with dollars from the federal and state and local government sectors. The future is really, really bright in terms of valuing conservation lands. And I'll get to the specifics of Governor Lee's conservation strategy. And it's really kind of built around that idea of valuing conservation lands. And if you happen to be listening, like a quarter of our park rangers were Monday night when they were in their staunch of in-service training. And I saw this last year. Last year was my first year in this role as Deputy Commissioner of Environment Conservation and Director of State Parks. The park rangers get together in groups of a third at a time at one point in time during the year and get all of their training to maintain their law enforcement commission. And the first group that does that happens to be during the State of the State from Governor Lee. And so last year, I was listening to Governor Lee's State of the State, and he included a very important start, and that was the most important word to me in the whole speech, was start of a conservation strategy. And I knew there was a room full of park rangers up at Fall Creek Falls listening to this same discussion. And the investment that Governor Lee asked the legislature last year, and the legislature approved, was phenomenal in terms of conservation lands and investment in state parks. Going to replace two old, extremely worn out, but still quite beautiful if you want to go stay there before they're demolished, state lodges at Natchez Trace rather, and down in Henry Horton, and money into 4 critical public-private partnership trails in Tennessee, as well as money set aside to complete the Cumberland Trail, which will run from down near Chattanooga all the way up to the Cumberland Gap, and plans and funding for establishing 4 new parks in addition to the 57 state parks we already have in Tennessee. Huge, huge step forward last year as a start. Like I said, the most important word to me last year was start. I had to help the team that I had been asked to lead learn how to build a bunch of parks all at one time, right? And I came from the tire manufacturing sector, so I'd had a little experience at building tire plants. It's a little different, but certain aspects of it are the same. What do you need to do? Put it on a list, figure out when you're going to get it done. Stick with the plan. So we've been doing that very diligently over the last year for those 4 new state parks that were announced last year. And then fast forward to last Monday night, Governor Lee's State of the State. I'm kind of on pins and needles, sort of, not really, because I know what he's going to say, but, you know, I mean, he could change his mind any minute until he says it, right? So he shares several values in his State of the State address that relate directly to the value of conservation lands. And those values included the value of health, including mental health. We know that being outdoors and having the recognition that you are welcome and invited into an outdoor experience is good for your mental health, it's good for your relationship health, and it's good for your physical health. Governor Lee also discussed the advancement of rural economic strength in Tennessee. When he came into office, there were 15 of our counties identified as distressed. I think what that means is in the bottom 10% in the nation. We've got a lot of work still to do, but that number has been whittled down to 8 in Tennessee. That's worthy of a little pat on the back and encouragement that we can get it done and we keep going. Health and economic vitality. But there's another aspect that I've picked up in my conversations with leadership in the state, and that is, it was mentioned earlier, the sense of place. Now, I'm an Aldo Leopold reader. I mean, that's my go-to on a pretty regular basis. And the construct of a sense of place has a lot of value in Tennessee. And one of the things that I've found that resonates in terms of the sense of place is the idea for grandparents that their grandkids might come back to Tennessee. They might go off to college, they might go off for their first job, they might get drugged away by some sweetheart. But if we've got a sense of place in our youth because they've had a chance to get outside and play, they've had a chance to go fall in love with a state park where we've got phenomenal natural and cultural resources, then they might come back. And that resonates strongly in terms of that sense of place, to be the kind of place our grandkids might come back to. So, those are some of the values. Now the fun part. In Governor Lee's address this year, last Monday night, he referenced state parks as the cornerstone of conservation. And he didn't just mean that the acres and the number of parks that we have are going to do a good job within those boundaries of taking care of those resources, that we're moving forward on learning how to do a better job of resource management, including letting some of the wild, the grasslands come back to predominance on the landscape in certain places. He also meant that those parks plant the seed of stewardship. They plant the seed of stewardship. And the first thing on the whiteboard in my office is stewardship beyond our boundaries. That is our main critical focus for me when I come into the office every day. So he identified not just money set aside to help preserve agricultural lands, money that he's proposing to establish a strong blueways system to add on to what I would suggest is a pretty strong set of accessibility points across the state for blueways and river access, but also challenged us to raise up 8 new state parks. So that will take our state park number from the 57 last year, 61, and this will take it up to 69. And we're sharing a map here that just shares this year in the blue for the new state parks. I'm not sure why. Let's see here. Classic. I got. Well, there's one on the left-hand side over there in the west that's not showing up here. That is Dry Branch. Beautiful state natural area right now. It's getting hiked and loved, and so we're going to raise that up to state park status. Now, what I want to share with that is a new motto that everybody in my bureau understands now because they've heard me say it about a half a dozen times. 6 is enough. Now, those of you who know state parks in Tennessee will probably figure out what I'm talking about. That's 6 lodges, all right? 6 big state lodges is enough. We're running those well. We're investing in them to bring them up to wow status, but that's enough. So we're talking about these new state parks. A lot of them will remain kind of wilderness-esque state parks, all right? They'll have ranger service, contact. They'll have nice amenities so that you can take an easy walk, or a lot of them some pretty rigorous outback kind of experiences. So Dry Branch in the west, Head of the Crow down in the south. I love the name of that. It's the Head of the Crow Branch Creek. Laurel Snow, which will be a new park on the Cumberland Trail, and that's currently a state natural area, so we'll be raising that up. And Ocoee, we're going to split Ocoee and Hiawassee. They've been being run as a single state park, but they really need to be stood up as 2 separate state parks, and so we're going to set them up as 2 separate state parks. And then a couple of real important ones I want to share here that have a lot to do with that sense of place. Right in the middle there is a place called Cardwell Mountain. That will be a state archaeological park, a little bit like Old Stone Fort down on I-24, off of I-24. And the focus on that will be the Native American culture that has left such a fascinating footprint there. And let me tell you, one of the things I learned when I came into this role is if you're at a party with the folks in my bureau, hang out with the archaeologists. They're the most interesting people in the room. Fascinating work that they're doing. And also Fort Southwest Point up by Kingston, which is currently a city park, but that is a fort, the remains of a fort that have been well interpreted by the city and well preserved, but need to be elevated a little bit. The story it tells, the biggest piece of that story, is the story of Tennessee's role in the Revolutionary War era frontier. Doesn't it seem like all we ever hear about is Civil War era? I mean, Tennessee's been around doing a lot of stuff, even with Europeans, for a long time, let alone the 15,000 or maybe 45,000 years before that. So anyway, I just wanted to share that in terms of the nature of these state parks that are getting stood up, and look forward to the rest of the conversation. I'm hearing from Liz.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That's a tough act to follow, but I'll try. I'm Liz McLaurin. I'm president and CEO of the Land Trust for Tennessee, and I'm so grateful that our work is being included this year in this conference. I love seeing all of these familiar faces. I want to recognize Jeannie Nelson, who is my predecessor at the Land Trust, and sitting next to her is J.B. Rule, who's on our trustee council, and also Martin Brown, who's a former board member and great friend of the organization. His father actually was one of the founders of the Land Trust for Tennessee. And we were founded in 1999. This is our 25th anniversary year. Can't believe it, Jeannie. And we were founded by Phil Bredesen and a group of thought leaders in Middle Tennessee with a mission to conserve the unique character of Tennessee's natural and historic landscapes and sites for future generations. And that means all of Tennessee. We were founded in Middle Tennessee, but we're a statewide organization. We've protected 136,000 acres across the state. Let me see if I can, let's see. There we go. Across the state through 455 projects. The bulk of the conservation work is through something called a donated conservation easement that we heard about a little earlier. It's a voluntary, perpetual agreement between a land trust and a landowner to limit development on land that has conservation values. Once the easement closes, it's our responsibility as a land trust to uphold that easement in perpetuity. That includes responding to reserve right requests, working with new landowners as land changes hands, because we don't own the land, we just hold the conservation easement on the land, and getting to know those new landowners so they understand the terms of the easement. We do amendments on easements when there's a net positive for conservation. We work on condemnations and much more. So that's actually a huge part of our work. We tend to focus on the active conservation. And that would also include on the stewardship side, as we call this stewardship, possibly going to court to make sure the easement is upheld as the donor wanted. So we're promising to be around forever. And last time I checked, that's a really long time. We also help government entities with land acquisitions and land planning initiatives. Nashville naturally was mentioned earlier, the open space plan for Nashville. And we serve on local and regional planning teams. We're nationally recognized, having won the Land Trust Alliance National Land Trust Excellent Award in 2020. We were the 20th land trust in the country to receive that, and we've been accredited 3 times. In 2019, for our 20th anniversary, well, it was really 2018 that we started this process, but we decided to undertake a statewide conservation plan. We had been pretty reactive, not necessarily as proactive as I think we should be, and really looking at our mission, the values we hold as an organization. This is not meant to be a statewide plan for anybody but us, but it's relevant, I think, to this conversation. So it was a daunting task because we could not find another statewide land trust in the country that had ever done a statewide plan. A lot of little communities had done one. Stowe, Vermont's a great example. But this was a new thing. So this plan, called Forever Tennessee, now guides our proactive conservation work. I brought a bunch of copies over there. It looks like this. So please take one if you don't already have one. Our process began by identifying the conservation resources most important to the mission of the Land Trust for Tennessee, and then we mapped those resources using GIS. First, mapped the most important agricultural lands, then critical wildlife habitats, then historic and cultural resources, and finally, critical natural landscapes like forest, land, and riparian buffers. And because portions of Tennessee are growing at an unprecedented rate, we then added a threat layer, and that's that layer at the bottom that you can see. So the red is the threat. And that was so that we could really focus our attention on those areas before it's too late. Then we combined all of these layers, we call it our baklava. And then the dark green areas emerge as those with the highest concentration of conservation values. The purple represents the lands that are already in public hands or conserved through private conservation. And when it was published, we recognized that the nature of the data used, and that was in 2019, the nature of it to build the conservation priority models, it's ever changing, and many of the data sets have already been updated, refined, or improved. In addition, there's also so much new data available that simply wasn't around when we initially began the process in 2018. So the goal from the outset was always to make this a living, breathing plan. The Tennessee landscape is changing all around us all the time, so our priority model needs to reflect that change as well. A couple specific examples of the new analyses and model components. On the agricultural model, we've made the addition of soil organic carbon data. So this is not reflected in this map, but we have the maps where it is reflected. We're now looking at farmland from a standpoint of not only contributing to food security, healthy local economy, and preserving a rural way of life, as we talked about, in sort of helping some of the counties that are struggling, but from a climate change mitigation standpoint as well. Some of the soils in our farmland really punch above their weight when it comes to sequestering carbon deep underground. To that end, we've incorporated soil organic carbon data from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization to help prioritize these areas of farmland. One other is, and this was talked about earlier in some of the things that Lucy was talking about, flood susceptibility modeling. The biggest way that affects the biggest way that the effects of climate change will be felt in the southeastern United States, as we heard, is an increase in flooding events, like those already seen across Tennessee. Our first iteration of the plan included FEMA's floodplain areas, which are critical to protect, but these data are notoriously less than accurate and do not convey how landscapes upstream contribute to flooding downstream. So we're currently, and I think JB is helping us with this a bit, developing a flood susceptibility model that takes a detailed look at factors like slope, water networks, land cover, and precipitation estimates to give a picture of which lands in the state really need to be protected to slow runoff and mitigate the effects of flooding events. And so our model, this gets back us to the Land Trust's work. This is a live model, and which means we can hide, and over here you can see the legend. We can hide and see different data sets based on what we're trying to see. This is a screenshot of that in action, showing our established cores. You see the areas that are surrounded by a boundary. Those are our conservation opportunity regions that we're focusing on based on all of the data that we put together as an organization. And it also, this one includes political boundaries and interstates, just to give a sense of where we are in the state. And as I mentioned, this is a plan based on our conservation values as an organization, but we also draw from other conservation planning data and combine the layers of ours and all of these, including TNCs, which they're updating, I think, pretty soon, right? We can combine all of these into another map. And that, again, here you see emerging the dark green. And so that's all of those plans put together that then gives a broader perspective. It's not just the land trust perspective, but a broader perspective on some possible priorities for the state. So that's really all I have. But I have copies of Forever Tennessee for everyone, not everyone, for some of you, and we have plenty. And you can find it online on our website, landtrusttn.org. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to a great discussion. And thank you to my fellow panelists. It's great to hear what y'all are up to.
Terrific. Thank you all so much. I stood up because there aren't enough mics, so I thought this would be helpful. So it's so exciting. Let me just call out here. I mean, it's so exciting to hear everything that's going on, and it's so terrific to have diverse perspectives and approaches to these questions all sitting together and talking and finding those places of shared values, which are really exciting to hear about. But I view my job as moderator to be a little bit challenging. So I'd like to ask 2 questions just to get the ball rolling. One about zoning and then one about the conservation issue. So, you know, it's just so interesting to me. I've been teaching land use law for about 20 years now. And when I started teaching, the whole conversation was about sprawl. And it was all about trying to control large lots in the suburbs. And the key to affordability at that time was to increase infill development, was to reduce dependency on cars, was to have transit-oriented urban development like the Ertzen. It's not affordable, right? It turns out not to be the key to affordability, and at the same time, of course, suburban sprawl continues. We have now a set of zoning prescriptions that are sweeping the country, which are usually about changing zoning from being disabling to being enabling of urban development, right? To keep zoning from preventing the kind of development we want. Well, I think one of the things that's so fascinating about Nashville is I've looked over the last couple of years, we had 18,000 housing units built in 2022, I believe, 28,000 in 2021. For basis of comparison, New York City had only about twice those numbers and about, at least 10 times as many people. So we are actually doing really well in the housing production space relative to a lot of cities, right? I mean, clearly we have affordability, clearly we're calling for a lot more supply, but compared to New York, compared to California, it's actually astonishing how much we are building here. But we also, now as I understand it, have a little bit of a glut in our multifamily housing. We have vacant apartments downtown. We have more pressure out in the suburbs than ever. How do we deal with this? So, Lucy, you've told us zoning hasn't been reformed in 20 years. What is it that is going to make zoning turn from this restrictive process to an enabling process that produces the kind of growth that we want and need and that satisfies housing demand? You have like 30 seconds. No.
Okay. That was a lot. I think so there are a lot of different things I would say that need to be addressed. I mentioned the unhealthy relationship that the city of Nashville, in my opinion, has with the private sector. We have an illusion that the development community should pay for all of the infrastructure. That's great. They should pay for some of it. But that paradigm has really limited our ability to invest in infrastructure where we need it and when we need it, and to do so comprehensively. So I say that because zoning is the unhappy tool where so much of that infrastructure investment is required. And so if you think about it, we're on sort of a system that says rezoning is really good. Let's just keep rezoning because that's the way we're going to get a sidewalk. That's the way we're going to get a street completed. Really and truly, that needs to be rebalanced, and that will help the city sort of address we'll make zoning what it is, which is what's the right development type. A lot of affordable housing developers will tell me that the infrastructure investments and costs are prohibitive to being able to really deliver the kinds of units that we want. We are growing quite a bit in the urban core and in Southeast, and so we are growing where the city desires, I would say, but we encumber the private sector with quite a bit in terms of the public benefits. And as a planner, I love to encumber private development with, that's my, yes, please, dreamy. But for a city of our size, we have to grow up a little bit and do it differently. Do you disagree with that?
No.
Okay.
Mark, I'd love to, if you just follow up for 1 second. I mean, my sense is that there's actually a surplus of multifamily units available now. I'd be very interested if that is also your impression. And, what is it that the market actually is craving right now, and what's standing in the way of satisfying that, in your view?
Yes, we have built too many multifamily residential for rent products in this town, and we were the #1 emerging trend city through ULI 2 years ago, last year, and again this year. So that is one of the reasons why so much investment is coming here. But of course, now the climate's changed, the interest rates have gone up. You won't see as many starts at this point. Really, in my opinion, the good old days, we used to have blighted neighborhoods where you had tax increment financing and you could use it as a tool to actually create the affordability for workforce housing. That workforce housing need is huge at this point, and there's still the American dream of home ownership. It's not for everybody, but a lot of people would like to own their home and benefit from an emerging community. At this point, I think about, if this transit referendum is happening, then we're going to be looking at transit oriented development opportunities where you look at the transit stop and you build up and you move around it. It is legal to have tax increment financing at those transit stops, so maybe that's one tool where we can give people the ability to create more affordable housing, hopefully more for sale affordable housing, so people can own their place. And then secondly, I think about these urban greenway systems. You're going to have something called trail-oriented development, and you have seen it in cities like the Beltline in and around Atlanta. You've seen the High Line in New York City. You've seen the Cross-Cultural Trail in Indianapolis, the Midway in Minneapolis. You've seen what that does. Really, in my opinion, we have to think about the zoning and the tools that create affordable housing and affordable living really in some of these neighborhoods, which will eventually have a greenway system.
That's terrific and interesting, just to call out the relationship between the tax increment financing and the idea that maybe there are other ways of funding our infrastructure. It's very interesting to hear that conversation. Terrific. So let me turn to the conservation piece. So as we think about land conservation, a set of values that I also hold dear, there can sometimes be a tension, though, between land conservation and, in particular, our need for more development capacity in a lot of places. I saw the map that you put up of land conservation right in Davidson County. How should we think about, if not urban land conservation, at least land conservation near urban cores that might, in fact, limit development in ways that might be a problem for meeting our housing needs?
I think that's a problem nationwide, and the more expensive land gets, the harder it is for a family to hold on to their land and conserve it with the land trust or any land trust. And so I think a lot of the conservation planning that honestly that the Parks Department is going to take on, I think at the end of this year, will be really helpful to really identify those places that where we do need more pocket parks and where there's less there's less of a, there's less access for people. And I think it's really great. I applaud the Parks Department for looking at that, but it also relates back to the map that Lucy showed from Nashville Next. But I think, I think some of the governor's funding will be available for farmland conservation and potentially purchased easements. So if a family cannot donate their conservation easement, there'll be money available depending on the conservation values and depending on what the state decides are the priorities. I think that is a possibility too, especially on farmland moving forward, and that will help. I hope will help drive a little more urban conservation. It has been very hard in the last number of years to do a whole lot in Davidson County. So,
do you think the state has a view about, say, urban land conservation efforts?
Absolutely. Everybody wants a backyard. Everybody wants a backyard and wants their kids and grandkids to have a backyard. So a piece of the conservation land is the service that it provides from a recreation perspective. A piece of the value of conservation land is that service for recreation. So it's not merely the water quantity and quality issues, the air quality issues, the carbon sequestration. Really happy to hear that information in reference to ag land is getting more light of day. But it's the value of recreation. And so that is from our department's role beyond just our state parks. We have a division of recreation resources that funnels both state money and federal money to the local level for outdoor recreation as well as some indoor recreation, but mostly kind of aiming it toward outdoor recreation. And every time you have a recreation opportunity, you've got a health opportunity that supports the quality of life in those communities. So that's sort of front and center with our mindset in what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you. I've managed to use almost all of the time, but I was told we can go a couple minutes over, which gives us time for one or two questions from the audience. Yes, in back.
Do you mind repeating the question one more time?
You said you can't build on land or the natural resources. Is that why all construction is downtown, making it hard to get around instead of out in the suburbs and outskirts of Nashville?
That may be the conservation.
Yeah.
So we have two new subdivision regulatory approaches. Both of them encourage building housing away from natural resources, but often it's under the same ownership. So if you look at some of these large pieces of land outside the core of the city, you'll have one owner trying to divide their land. Our regulations are now really pressing them to build smaller housing lots on their property, but saving the open space and not disturbing those if at all possible. I think that might have been me.
Terrific, which is good land use policy, I will say, as a land use professor. Terrific. Yes. Good. So how do we balance the competing conservation goals in?
Yes, I'm familiar with that. I think, as you know, we've done this plan, and the plan really does look at larger scale conservation. Small kind of 3-acre, 4-acre parcels that are not connected don't make as much sense for us as an organization because we have to monitor those properties every year. And in tight environments like that there's more vulnerability for violations because people build a shed or people do things on those small parcels, or there's a neighbor trespass or something. And that's a really hard thing for us to enforce, and we're realistic about that. Now, if there were a number of parcels that were connected, and that's what we have tried to do, but there seems to be a little spot in the middle that isn't going to get protected, that makes it very challenging for us.
And there's always a cost-benefit calculus, and even though
Right.
conservation easements may be donated, they still represent foregone tax revenue, and so we want to make sure that we are in fact getting our conservation money's worth when we're taking these conservation steps.
Right, and we definitely look at our perpetuity, and is this something, there are other vehicles to protect small spaces like deed restrictions.
Terrific. Unfortunately, I think we are out of time, but please join me in thanking our panelists today. Thank you all for being here.